looking in trade regulation for the coming year. Doreen Edelman is chair and partner of the law firm Lowenstein Sandler's Global Trade and National Security Practice Group. Hi, Doreen.
Hi there.
Thanks for being with me today. Really appreciate it, and very important issue to be talking about. Looking back at 2022 to start, what were the significant regulations that most impacted global traders?
Where do you begin? I mean, there were so many of them. I think one of the largest takeaways, well, I shouldn't say that. Let's start with answering your question directly.
Okay.
You're a business trying to do global trade. You've got new import rules. You've got to know where your components are coming from, because if they happen to be coming from a particular region of China, they now can't get into the US. That's a strict liability issue. If you are exporting, you need to ensure that you understand what your goods are and how they're classified, where they're going, traditional sanctions issues. That multiplied tenfold because we had more than 900 regulations on Russia sanctions alone.
Wow.
It does not mean you can't do business in Russia, but it means you can't do business in certain industries in Russia or with certain persons in Russia. And what it really meant is companies had to make a board level decision of, did they want to do business in Russia because of the humanitarian issues? So you've got outbound, you've got inbound, you've got increased sanctions on almost everything. If you're a government contractor, you had new rules requiring you to take a look at what you were selling the government. If you're in the information security, information technology department, are you using any Chinese parts? Because they can't work their way into a government system. Same thing, that was part of the FCC has just come out with something new on that in the last week. So no matter what you do, you had more regulations coming. And the bottom line on all that is that you really have to understand your flow of goods, and particularly your supply chain. And let's put on top of that the increased enforcement of all these matters. So you need to ensure that your company and your foreign distributors or your foreign agents understand all these rules, because the government has said they're increasing their enforcement on anti-corruption, on transshipment. If you say you're sending something to Ukraine, but it ended up in Iran when it got offloaded in the UAE, or even inadvertently you're sending something to Germany and then it's going to Russia or somewhere else, Spain to Cuba, all those issues are more and more on the table. And then on the vendor side, can you get your goods? Where are they coming from? And how do you make sure that you're going to have what you need when you need it? And then one more thing, if that wasn't enough, I have to mention foreign investment, the CFIUS rules. They didn't change, but a significant thing happened. President Biden issued an executive order, first executive order ever. And what I think it means is that you're going to see in this year a focus on non-notified transactions. The government is going to go after investments when they didn't notify CFIUS, and someone's going to be the first entity that is going to be notified and penalized for not notifying the U.S. government about an investment.
And
any
kind of foreign investment? This is not just physical trade. This is actual investment.
If you could create a movie scenario that creates a national security issue. So let's say you're a biotech company or a medical device company sitting in New Jersey. You buy some parts from China, some parts from Japan. You're now looking at a Singapore investor. They come in. If CFIUS says that Singapore investor maybe has ties to a Chinese backer or Chinese equity money, and your product, let's say it's something even not emerging tech, let's say a pacemaker. That pacemaker goes on a person. Can that pacemaker collect data that then goes to China? So if you put that in a movie script, could you see a bad outcome? And that's the way the US government are looking at foreign investment today. National security can mean anything. It can mean how many pizzas go to the naval base. It can mean, do you have access to data on people's sexual orientation, what medications they take? That is all being looked at, and they've increased the enforcement action on all those issues.
So the basic requirements of that type of visibility for imports and exports, that's been with us for many years, but it sounds like you're talking about just they've expanded exponentially in the last year or two or whatever. Yeah.
Segues right into your next question, 2023.
You got it. What do we can expect to see?
A Republican House, though the margin isn't great, but it is a Republican House.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the Republican leadership at their word, they're going to be extremely busy with oversight. They also believe the current administration has not done enough on all these issues we've talked about. Yes, they added export controls on other Chinese companies, but they didn't make a list of foundational and emerging tech that we want to limit to U.S. ownership. They didn't go far enough. They didn't take away MFN status for China. They didn't put an embargo on Russia. So all of these issues, whether they're going to be just rhetoric or the members of Congress want to do something, they're going to put an increased national security pressure for U.S. companies that's going to even accelerate what happened last year.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. So this is more than just reporting requirements, such as maybe the SEC might require on certain fronts. It sounds like these are actual requirements with teeth, that if you fail to follow this, there are actual penalties and there are consequences of failing to do so.
Exactly. So smart companies, and I know you can have smart companies that don't have resources, but smart companies are going to have to figure out a way to be more attentive to these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, trade issues were not boardroom kind of issues. I think because of Russia and the decisions that boards or presidents or founders have had to make, trade has gotten more attention because now of the concern for the protection of intellectual property, technology, these China issues. Companies at a higher level, as part of their strategy, they're going to have to think about this stuff, and they're going to have to understand how it affects their companies and make sure that they have got training and compliance in place so they don't inadvertently trip. Because the only excuse, if you will, is that we care about it, we knew about it, we had compliance in place, we just inadvertently made a mistake. Not that we tried to not be compliant.
Got to show the due diligence, definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, this is alongside the growing awareness of the importance of the supply chain, too, is it not? I mean, during the last couple of years. So maybe we're seeing both the physical supply chain and the regulatory aspect of it together, bringing a new awareness or the need for a new awareness by companies who are developing international.
I actually think we're going ultimately to a transparent supply chain, because if the different federal government agencies, or if you do business with the government or the military, they're slowly making all these little requirements. It is going to make companies have to have a transparent supply chain to know where everything's coming from, whether it's because you want to save money on duties or because you want to sell to the government. Chinese products are not going to be allowed in, so third-party countries or our allies are going to have to make a decision. Do they want to use our parts and our friends and neighbors' parts, or do you want to use Chinese parts, which we're not going to touch?
Now, as a partner of a law firm that specializes in these very issues that we're talking about, obviously that's something you do and you do very effectively. But to what extent do companies need to have in-house expertise at a particularly high level? I don't know, up in the executive suite or what? Do they have to have people on staff who can guide them through these minefields that you're describing?
I would love that, because then they're more aware, and if they're more aware, they're going to be more compliant. That's the real problem. It isn't that companies don't know what to do. It's that they don't have enough manpower, or this side of the company knows their little piece, but that side of the company only knows their little piece, and they haven't connected everything together yet. And so it does have to meet up at the top. That's how you see a lot of big companies getting in trouble. It's not that they wanted to make the mistake. They just didn't have the mechanism internally to make sure that the message got to the people down below and up above that needed to have it. And then you have to worry about They're distributors and agents. How much do you trust them? How much do you know about them?
Third party risk is going to be huge, right?
Exactly. And you've
Yeah.
got to document that. It's the only way to protect yourself. Get
Yeah.
certificates, get compliance documents.
Hmm. Well, for all the headaches that this is going to bring companies, when they come out of it at the other end, they're going to have a type of visibility that's good for their company anyway. So not a
That's
bad thing to happen,
No,
ultimately.
that's a very good point, because usually as a trade lawyer, we're not in a position to save companies money. But
Yeah.
if they understand their supply chain, we can help them. I mean, I love the example of a pet water fountain. Client was bringing it in, it's made in China, made in China. Well, when we delved down and actually looked at the parts in that water fountain, the motor was coming from Japan. And the US customs rules say where the motor is where the product is from. It doesn't matter that you're assembling the plastic in China. So all of a sudden, you've got a pet fountain coming from China that's actually should be labeled made in Japan, and you reduce these 301 duties and all the regular duties on your product, which is significant. So it's beneficial. That's just one example of how it's smart for a company to do this exercise.
Okay, well, I'm going to take the positive aspect of this message then, because it sounds like, it's going to be a big thing for companies to deal with, but in the end, they're going to come out better in their supply chains and in their due diligence and regulation. Doreen Edelman, thank you so much for joining me to talk about some of these huge issues that companies have been dealing with and will be dealing with on the international trade front in the year to come. Thanks very much for being with me.
You're welcome.